Well, hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for their fantastic support with this channel. I make these videos because I enjoy doing it first and foremost, but it's now 6 months since we started and the response has been overwhelming, over 42,000 subscribers, so a big thank you to everyone. Okay, so this time I'm going to talk about the Ferrari Dino. It's quite extraordinary really, because the last video was about the Fiat Dino, a very, very important car in Fiat and Ferrari history. And apparently Dinos are like policemen or buses. You don't get any and then you get two along at the same time. Because I had no idea when I filmed the Fiat Dino video that this car was going to come into the workshop. And yet here it is. So this is a Ferrari Dino 246 GTS. This is the Ferrari equivalent of the Dino theme. The Dino was the first project, the joint project, the Fiat Dino Coupe and Spider and the Ferrari Dino counterpart were the first joint collaborative project between Fiat and Ferrari. And they were sort of sizing up the look of each other. And keep it simple, the rest is history, because Fiat still own Ferrari to this day, and it's worked. They've kept in Formula One racing and they've kept making road cars. But this car is also very, very important in Ferrari history because it's the Dino itself was the first ever mid-engined production road-going Ferrari. And the model, it became a blueprint, and mid-engined Ferraris to this day account for more than 50% of Ferrari's total output. So all of a sudden the blueprint was enormously successful from day one. What we've got here is the GTS, it's the targa top version, which is Ferrari's answer to the Fiat Dino Spider. Same engine, the same Fiat manufactured engine, but mounted in the middle. And it's got those Fiat moulded into the castings on the engine, which, as I mentioned in the last video, is very galling for the Ferrari Dino owner. These cars weren't originally branded as Ferraris. Nowhere on this car, outside, badge-wise, will you see the word Ferrari or the prancing horse symbol from the factory. But they were a Ferrari through and through. The Dino project was Ferrari's son Alfred Dino's pet thing. That's why Ferrari was so keen to be a proponent of the V6 engine, which he did with this. And the Ferrari theme is all over the car. The DNA is all over the car. But Enzo Ferrari was an astute enough businessman to think to himself, is the Dino brand going to devalue and in some way lessen the impact of my V12 cars, which I'm famous for? So for that reason, Enzo Ferrari did not badge this car as a Ferrari. In fact, the original sales brochure actually said, tiny, brilliant, safe, almost a Ferrari. But what happened was, when it came to actually selling the cars, the dealers, Maranello concessionaires, the original dealers for the UK, people were saying, well, hang on, why am I paying, I think it was about £4,500, why am I paying that for a car that I'm told is a Ferrari, but isn't a Ferrari? So what Maranello concessionaires did was to buy some of the familiar Ferrari script, the graphic Ferrari in chrome, little one about that long, and they actually drilled holes in the back panel and stuck the Ferrari badge on the back, and maybe a prancing horse as well. For the sake of a few pounds expenditure on their part, all of a sudden they had a Ferrari to sell. And people bought them. So really weird sort of tensions of different agendas and politics and things like that. But the end result is just beautiful. It's considered, probably along with the Lamborghini Miura, one of the most beautiful cars ever created. This particular car is very, very special because it's not only one of the original 160 or so right-hand drive Dino GTSs, the targa top, but it's what's called a chairs and flares Dino. So the chairs are the Daytona seats, which could be ordered as quite an expensive optional extra on the Dino originally. And the flares were this bit here, the flared wheel arch. And this was needed because the original order form, if you specified the flared wheel arches, it was to cover these wider 7.5-inch magnesium alloy wheels, which were made by Campagnolo, and they actually had the Dino script cast into the wheel. You can buy modern alloy replicas now, but they don't have the Dino script molded into them like these originals, and they're very valuable, these wheels. 7.5-inch wide wheels was really quite the thing in the 1970s. That was sort of out there, really. I mean, Ferrari Daytonas had 7.5-inch wide wheels as standard front and rear. You could get a factory option of 9-inch rear wheels on the Daytona and the Boxer, but the 7.5-inch for a car like this was sort of really cutting edge in a way. It seems strange now with these balloon-sized tyres on them, but this was it. This was quite the thing. There were 2 optional extras. You could have the Daytona seats and you could have the flared arches, but only 7 left the factory to this specification right-hand drive. 7. And this is an ultimate of Dino sort of model range, really. You've got the Targa top and the chairs and flares specification from new. And this car was also specified in Nero in black from new. And this is number 4 of the 7 right-hand drive Dino 246 GTS chairs and flares produced. A lot of people have converted them now. They've put the Daytona seats in, but this is one of the originals. The car is lovely. It's had a major restoration by a sort of very well-known specialist in the UK 2 or 3 years ago. But the engine is not quite right on it. It's not pulling properly. It's got a misfire somewhere, which I need to look into. And also the tappets on the engine are a little too clattery for my liking, a little noisy. So we're just going to have a look at that, see if we can sort it out, and then we'll take it for a road test afterwards. Well, what we've done now is stripped the cam cover off the back of the engine so that we can gain access to the camshafts. This is a camshaft out of a V12 engine. The cam lobe, as it rotates, obviously opens and closes the valve, and it pushes this down, which is called a cam follower. In the 1960s and 70s, this was very cutting edge, but most cars have got this these days. Most cars nowadays have also got what are called hydraulic tappets. So this bit here, the bit that bobs up and down, has got a sort of smaller diameter counterpart that fits inside it. And then the oil squeezes the two apart to take up the clearance. And this gently rubs on the cam as it's going round all the time. But on cars that don't have hydraulic tappets, and these don't, it's adjusted manually, which is what we're going to do. They have a clearance between the bucket and the cam lobe, so that this shape is actually different on cars with non-hydraulic tappets. And they have what are called introductory ramps here and here to gently take up the clearance like that, and then lift the valve off its seat, and then obviously let it down again. And this clearance is actually critical for performance and for wear and for noise. And there's a couple of them that I've identified while I've been listening to the engine. They're actually out of adjustment. They're too noisy, and the cams are pretty new, so I know they're not worn, which is the other reason that it would make a noise. So I'm going to adjust those and also sort out a running problem which has been plaguing the car as well, which is a blocked jet in a carburetor, which is easy to do, so that's no problem. But adjusting the tappets, making the engine run more smoothly, more quietly, is what we're going to do to this car. The valve clearances on this engine are very small, as they are on all engines. It's 0.15 to 0.2 millimeters for the inlet valves, and 0.25 to 0.3 for the exhaust, because the exhaust valve heats up a bit more because it's got the hot exhaust gases going past it. So obviously I had a listen to this engine, as we know, before we took it apart, and I identified a couple of tappets which sounded clattery to my ears, too noisy. And indeed, they do correlate with the findings I've got here. So 4 of the valve clearances, 4 of the tappet clearances are all right. They're within spec. 2 of them are over spec by 0.05 of a millimeter. Doesn't sound a lot, but it makes a big difference. So this tappet here, what I'm going to do now is just recheck these valve clearances with my very tired but still very operational feeler gauges. So the The exhaust camshaft on this bank, going to need my specs, is 0.5, should be 0.5 to 0.25 to 0.3 of a millimetre. And both the feeler gauges go through there far too easily, really. So that's above 0.3 of a millimetres, which again correlates with the clunking noise. So what I'm going to do now is take that shim, the actual buckets. So we have a series of shims here, different thicknesses, and these are 33 millimetres diameter. And interestingly, another join between Fiat and Ferrari, another connectors. These exact same tappet shims are from a Fiat 124, Fiat 125, Fiat 130, Fiat 128. The vast majority of the Fiat range in the 60s and 70s actually used Ferrari tappet shims and vice versa. And these things are very, very hard. They're hardened because obviously the cam lobe is smashing, literally smashing them 50, 60, 70 times a second at high RPM. So they take a lot of stick, these things. I'm going to change these. I'll take them out. I'll work out what the difference needs to be, and we'll cut the correspondingly thicker shim in. So I'm actually just going to show you how we do this now with a bit of brute force and ignorance. What I've done is actually pushed the bucket down there against the valve spring pressure, and I put this little tool in here which jams it open. Then I can remove that, so that's actually open now. Then I get my pick and just pick the shim out of there very carefully. Oh, it's gone back in again. Obviously doesn't want to leave. Then the magnet goes in, pulls the shim out, and there we have it. So we pulled the shim out with the aid of a magnet. The surface here is quite a little bit worn. It's just very, very slightly starting to break up. The shim is marked on the back. I can very faintly see 3.6 millimetres. But because they wear, I always double check them, even if they're new. Yeah, that is just below 3.6, which means on the edge it probably is, yes. So the tappet clearance was 0.35 or thereabouts. It needs to be 0.25 to 0.3, so that needs to be, I need a new shim of 3.65 millimetres, 0.05 millimetres bigger. So I'll dig that out now. There we go. Yeah, there's a new shim. We can see 3.65 millimetres marked on it as the thickness. This is brand new. It's still got its coating on. It's never been installed in an engine. And miking it up, yeah, it's 3.65. So what I'll do now is put this back in the bucket, the tappet bucket, and remeasure the tappet clearance. And obviously the camshaft lobe, the actual nose of the camshaft, is sticking out. It's in the it's away from the bucket, so that we get a maximum clearance. Otherwise we won't get a valve clearance. There we go. That goes in there. That goes in there. Pull that out. Let it go. And let's see what the valve clearance is now. 0.25 feeler gauge still goes in. 0.3 does not. So that is exactly as it should be. That one slides in freely in the gap just, and that one is no way. So that's it. That was the last of the tappets done. We can put it back together now and see how she runs and see how she sounds. Yeah, we had a carburation fault, a fueling fault, which has gone, which is great. I was more concerned about the noisy tappets than I was about anything else, and because they do rob the engine of power, only slightly, but it all helps. It did have, as is often the case, as we know from other experiences with cars, with the videos,
sometimes low speed running can be a problem, particularly with modern fuels. They start gumming up tiny jets and capillaries and carburetors. But it certainly seems to be behaving well now. One of the joys of the Dino is the handling. The way, you know, I can steer this with my little fingers almost. Don't try this at home, but it's just such a cute car, really, and so pivotal in Ferrari's history, as I mentioned earlier on. Yeah, it's warmed up, running really nicely now. We've got good water temperature, good oil temperature. Oil pressure's exactly where it should be, and we got some fuel as well, so all good. I'm just going to try giving her a bit of stick along the straight. Very different sound, same engine essentially, slightly bigger than the Fiat Dino. This is the 2.4 version of the engine, but it's essentially the same engine, so I think it's about time we let it have its head and see if it's all there. Oh yes, she's there all right. Yeah, that's great. There's nothing worse than a car that's running badly. It just spoils the whole thing, really. Make sure that that flat spot, that running spot, that carburation spot has gone. So we'll just drop her down to second. Very different sound from the Fiat Dino, but just as lovely in its own way. And don't forget, this is the standard exhaust on this car. It's the stock exhaust and intake systems. Not like I did on the Fiat Dino. So this car is absolutely stock in all respects, and sounding lovely, sounding lovely.
Well, that concludes another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop video. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please like, please share, please subscribe, and thanks for watching.